Hi, I want to talk a little about what I think you should do if you think you've got long COVID. Now, I'll stress I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical person, but someone who has long COVID themselves and has worked and advocated for quite a few people around health issues for any and long COVID. So, the first thing I would recommend people do is document your symptoms. It's very easy further down the line to get asked in a medical appointment what issues you have, how long something's been going on, what over-the-counter medication have you been trying, and it's very hard to remember all of that. Also, when you're recording symptoms, some will sort of cluster together, and sometimes it's hard to know exactly what's going on and when, so it's really good to document symptoms. So that's the sort of first thing. Second thing I'd encourage is to see your doctor. Now, that comes with a few sort of caveats and sort of issues. So there was something in the news recently about somebody who'd been diagnosed as long COVID, and it turned out they had cancer, and unfortunately, they died. And this sort of thing is relatively common. One of the problems is that whilst quite a lot of people get COVID and then get issues that arise as a result of the COVID, sometimes things can just be coincidental in terms of timing. So you might have other issues. There's also quite a few issues that COVID can cause and trigger, but might not be necessarily classified as long COVID. It has sort of brought about diabetes in some people, or accelerated diabetes in some people. There's been sort of heart issues. There's been asthma, as was the case with myself. So I would advise to see a doctor. Now, ideally, part of that process, the doctor should be looking at carrying out some routine tests to rule out other possibilities. Now, what those will be will depend partly on the symptoms you're presenting with, and there's also some standard ones. Now, Dr. Shepherd of the ME Association, if you Google his sort of long COVID booklet, it kind of goes through a lot of what those should be. And again, I'm not a medical person. I'm not to say, oh, it should be this done or this thing should be tested. But I think that's a good starting point in terms of looking at what tests should be done. Now, I do have a little bit of caution there because some of these tests are exhausting. When you're ill and struggling with long COVID and really need to rest, sometimes some of these tests might feel like they're a lot to take on board. There's almost the problem is that in just about every case, these tests are not there to show that you've got long COVID. They're there to show you don't have something else. And unfortunately, what a lot of people have found is that the medical profession are quite often in taking those results, not showing anything to suggest that the patient's fine and everything's in their head if they're having problems. So I would sort of encourage you to try to make sure that the right tests are done, but also to be ready for some resistance from your doctor. Be ready for sometimes not being told why things are being done or what's being done. And it's important that you kind of make sure that you are told what's happening and you do understand what's happening so you can basically take further action if more things are needed. And sort of tied into that, I would sort of recommend if it's been at least 4 weeks since your COVID infection and you're having ongoing issues that seem serious enough that you're concerned, to look at instigating a referral to a long COVID clinic if possible, or other specialist. And it may well be you can tell straight away you've got some respiratory issues, in which case a referral to that deals with that, it is probably in order and worth instigating with your GP. So where you experience specific issues that tie into speciality, look at referrals and get a referral for a long COVID clinic if appropriate. But I would stress, don't just assume because you've been referred to a long COVID clinic that everything is in hand. People's experiences of long COVID clinics vary a lot. Some are better than others, but in each case, they've got knowledge gaps, they've got skill gaps, and in a lot of cases, they have biases where certain obvious things or important things will get missed. So it's really important to do it, but it's also important to understand that won't cover everything. And that's why I'd go into my sort of fourth recommendation, or fifth if you count other specialisms as its own, and that is appropriately to engage with peer support. So that could be watching videos like this, it could be Facebook groups, it could be in-person groups. And one of the reasons for that is because a lot of the symptoms people experience with long COVID are very similar, and other people, they've been through it, so they can share their experience. That can really help sort of people in terms of coping, understanding, but also in terms of how to navigate the health systems of wherever you live. Sort of see some of the symptoms you've got might cluster together into something. Some of the issues are very hard to describe. Trying to describe, say, post-exertional malaise, if someone else has experienced that, they kind of know exactly what it is, and it's just a lot easier. And sometimes it could be helpful in terms of identifying what symptoms you do and don't have by speaking to other people, explaining what it's like for them. So I'd really recommend engaging with peer support. I've benefited a lot from that. And sort of linked to that, my sort of fifth recommendation is to educate yourself. Now, the reason for this is because, unfortunately, when it comes to long COVID, you cannot reliably trust the medical profession to act without significant biases, and there's a good chance that they won't always have your best interests at heart. People are sometimes told it's all on their head, sometimes, and people are told, oh, the test is fine, you don't have a problem there. Sometimes people are discharged without referrals. Lots of quite basic things are not being done. Now, if you look at myself from long COVID, I've had respiratory issues. I've had issues sitting and standing, sometimes known as orthostatic intolerance. I've had issues that have worsened around my balance and vestibular sort of issues. And those have been my sort of main issues that I've sort of experienced. Now, in each case, I've only got appropriate referrals because I've done research, because I've gathered evidence, I've read articles, and I've kind of had to more or less diagnose those issues myself and instigate referrals myself, because those issues weren't being picked up by the medical profession, despite me making many sort of appointments and highlighting issues in quite a detailed way. They did pick up on an extra issue, which was sort of sleep apnea, which I wasn't aware of, and that's being sort of looked at. So I don't want to make out that the medical profession will always get things wrong. They just can't be relied on to get things right, partly because long COVID is new, but a lot of it's more down to sort of biases where obvious things aren't being sort of looked at. So in my case, I got asthma from long COVID and other respiratory issues. Now, I talked about this, I explained these issues, but because my x-ray came back clear, a lot of the doctors were just wanting to dismiss it as, oh, sort it out yourself, there's nothing we can do. And there wasn't much empathy and there wasn't much professionalism. And also, I met the standard tests for asthma, had those just been carried out. And so, if I wasn't educating myself, I wouldn't pick up on the bias and negligence, really, of the medical profession. So I think educating yourself is really important now. I will stress it doesn't need necessarily to always come from you. If you have an ally, a parent, a child, a spouse, a sibling, a best friend, it might be that some of this education isn't down to you. It might be someone else who takes it on to a point. But it's just about making sure that you are looking into these things yourself and then advocating for yourself to make sure you are actually seen and your health needs are being met rather than being ignored. So I think that's really important. The next point, number 6, sorry, is looking at rest and convalescence. Now, rest is a bit of a dirty word. Sometimes people are encouraged to just be active, to fight through it, to power through it. And with long COVID and with a lot of illnesses, actually, this doesn't work. So you are in danger if you have post-exertional malaise, which at least half of people with long COVID do, to basically overextend what you can do, leading to a significant reduction on what you can do for the next weeks and months moving forward. So overexertion, it can overstimulate and overstress organs that are sort of struggling post-COVID, and it can also shrink your energy envelope and cause all sorts of problems if you do too much too soon. And If you take convalescence, the sort of idea of very, very gradually sort of building up what you can do and resting, it can be really important at the early stage to minimize the extent to which your symptoms develop, and also to best enable you to cope with what you're experiencing. Seventh recommendation is to explore self-help strategies. A lot of these, it could also be going to a physiotherapist. You can access some of these in the NHS, but it's very much hit or miss. It's a bit of a postcode lottery, what is and isn't available where you are. But just to give some sort of illustrations, about over half of people with long COVID have post-exertional malaise. And for that, they kind of need to rest and learn to pace. Now, pacing is quite a complicated process. It's not just the word as it means. There's a lot to it, and a lot of people can get one-on-one support with that. I've done a whole series on this channel on pacing basics, which go through a lot of those basics, and it's about 4 hours worth of material to digest, and even that is just scratching the surface. So it might be you learn these yourself, it might be you reach out to a suitably trained and a physiotherapist with the right sort of attitude and approach that can look at things like pacing. Equally, a lot of people with respiratory issues find they benefit a lot from doing breath work, as well as referrals to look into those respiratory issues within the medical system. But respiratory physiotherapy or breath work can be really, really beneficial. And that can be worth looking at if you have any sort of issues, any heart palpitations, any sort of issues around breathlessness. It's worth speaking to your doctor about those, but it's also worth seeing what you can do yourself. And there are other areas where there's again a lot you can do in terms of self-help around people who've got issues with smell and taste post-COVID. There's a lot that can be potentially done yourself through exploring self-help strategies. So 2 more things, and then I'll finish this video. This is just an introduction. There's a lot more I could say. The next one, I would sort of focus on encouraging not to do exercise too fast or too soon. There's a lot of people with long COVID that can have post-exertional malaise or exercise intolerance. So exercise can make things much, much worse. And it can actually mean you've got much less energy to do things, rather than, I think a lot of people, they can associate exercise as being something that can be painful, it can be a struggle, something you can do. And sometimes it can take a day or two to recover from it. It's something you fight through and you get better and you build up strength. And they kind of view sort of long COVID through that metaphor or idea. And long COVID doesn't really work that way in 99% of cases. Generally speaking, there can be a lot of problems. So I've mentioned post-exertional malaise. There can also be problems with people's lungs and hearts from damage caused by COVID, directly or indirectly. There can be issues with people being able to sustain upright or sitting or standing that can be exacerbated by exercise. So there can be a lot of reasons why exercise can be problematic, and to do it safely, you kind of need to know what those issues are first and explore things cautiously. Finally, just want to highlight the importance of understanding biases. I've talked about problems with the medical profession. What we've found is that so often they're not doing what should be done in terms of long COVID. Now, there's theories as to why, but it seems quite clear that there's some sort of biases going on that are stopping them from doing the job properly. Presumptions of deconditioning being problems, not really wanting to get involved with long COVID, not really understanding or believing long COVID. There's lots of possible reasons, and they'll be different from practitioner to practitioner. All I'll stress is that you cannot reliably expect to have an adequate standard of care around any long COVID issue. You might do, and that might be great, but you can't sort of rely and expect on that. So with then, you have to take on more yourself. with that, you have to accept that you also have biases, and they can affect how well you can do what's the best thing for you to do. I am going to do another video probably looking at our own biases, because I think it's quite a big topic. It's just important to remember when you're looking at what the right thing for you to do is that you to be open to the idea of you having biases and challenge why you're doing the things you're doing. So that can be something as simple as saying, okay, why am I not chasing up my medical appointments this week? You know, if you were your own boss, and you had to justify your behavior or what you're doing to try to help yourself improve, you know, objectively, how would you justify it? Something like that could be a good sort of point. Equally, some people will be much more open to try something that's a pill rather than say something that's half an hour a day of physiotherapy. Other people will be much more open to natural remedies. Everyone has their own preferences and biases, and that's all good. But all I'm sort of encouraging you to do is just be open to gently challenging those biases to see if there's anything that could be helpful for you or more helpful, but it's otherwise being missed. So that's me sort of doing a short overview of what I would recommend doing if you think you've got long COVID. Finally, we'll say there's a lot of conditions and issues that people commonly have from long COVID. These include post-exertional malaise, dysautonomia or orthostatic intolerance. They include respiratory problems. They include sleep problems. And sometimes these, the percentages are that there can be issues in these areas with you because they're very common with long COVID. If you have some of the issues that indicate those, then these areas can be worth learning about when I talk about educating yourself. These things I'm talking about when I talk about instigating referrals, these are some of the areas that I'm sort of looking at. So that's everything for today. Hopefully you found this helpful. Feel free to ask any questions you've got, and I can elaborate more either in the comments or in the video. Thanks.